The question we all want to ask at some point or other, with an urgency that goes beyond most of our questions, is what do I do when I'm having a really, really hard time? What's the best way? Is the way that we might probably formulate it. What's the best way to get through a time which is really painful, mental pain or physical pain? Normally, we're not particularly interested in questions like this. We've got loads and loads of other superficial questions, considerations. But when we're in pain, there's only this one burning question. What's the best way to get through this pain, to cope with this pain? So then if we switch to an imaginary scenario, we've got two therapists, let's say. One is the positive therapist, one is the negative therapist. A positive therapist is a thinker. It's someone who operates out of thought, comes from thought, and nowhere else, because that's what a positive therapist is. It's a rationally orientated therapist. So if I was a positive therapist, then I'd tell you a way. I'd have to tell you a way. If I didn't tell you a way, what sort of a goddamn therapist would I be? Obviously, I'm going to tell you a way. And so the thing in positive therapy is we try to be very rigorous and scientific, in inverted commas, about finding out this way. We want to find it out and then we tell people it. And so that's very simple. So if that scenario works, I go in, talk to the positive therapist, they tell me the way, I go and practice the way, and even if it takes me a while to get the hang of it, I will in the end, and so that's great, if that actually worked. And when we're not in pain and we're living in the world which is not infiltrated by pain, this seems all very reasonable. But I would say that any of us who are in a lot of pain, it sharpens our faculties one hell of a lot, and we start seeing through a lot of bullshit. Because the thing is that when we are in pain, mental pain, and most particularly maybe, people come up to us a lot, offering us helpful suggestions, helpful thoughts, advice of one sort or another. And the thing is that when we are in that degree of pain, it's kind of like we're in an altered state of consciousness. Well, it is an altered state of consciousness. Generally, we can see through all of the advice. In other words, we can see that although the person, in all probability, means very well indeed, that the advice or the so-called help is two-dimensional. It's useless. It's pure fakery. Now, the person doesn't know that, because we don't know that until we're in this particular heightened state of consciousness when we're in the pain, because then there's some we know. We're very, very finely attuned to bullshit. Our bullshit meter is working very, very well. It doesn't do us any good in a way, we could say, because the awareness that people are coming out with all this useless bullshit stuff doesn't help us. It just makes us despairing, or it can make us despairing, because we think, why is everyone torturing me with all of this crap? But anyway, coming over to the negative therapist, if you can imagine a hypothetical negative therapist, would say that there is no way, there is no best way or any other way to get through pain. And there's no way, because if you think a little bit more about this word way or route or method or however we want to put it, a way really comes down to this rather than that. That's what makes a way, because if it's not this, then it's not the way. It's only this rather as opposed to that, this rather than that. So obviously, it's like a route, and there's a right way and there's a wrong way. So if I want to go to Limerick, then there's a right way in terms of that will get me there. I could go in the opposite direction and end up in Sligo or something like that. So that wouldn't be the right way. So this road, but not that road. And the road in itself is only a road because this is the road, and anything else is the curb or the field on the side of the road or whatever. That isn't the road. So it's this as opposed to that. So that's our normal thinking. But that type of thinking is the very devil when we're in acute mental pain, because it exacerbates things rather than bringing any healing or bringing any transcendence into the picture. It gets us stuck really firmly into the thinking mind, into the picture of the world that the thinking mind creates. What helps, therefore, is not to collapse our experience into logical categories or into subject and object or into me versus the world or me and the pain that I'm in or whatever it is. All of that stuff is collapsing. Thought comes in and we collapse things into categories. Now the term collapse implies that it's not a legitimate thing that I'm doing. I'm actually running everything together and producing at the end of it some understanding of the world that isn't at all true, but which conveniently fits in the way I want to analyze it or look at it. So we're playing to thought strength here. But the non-collapsed experience is just another way of talking about the non-dual experience. So the non-dual experience of anything, doesn't matter whether you're having a good time or a bad time, or it doesn't really matter anything that you might be doing. The non-dual experience would be, as the non-dual proponents tend to say, where life isn't happening to me. And that sounds kind of weird, but the thing is, if I say, well, life is this thing and it's happening to me, then I've broken symmetry. I've collapsed. I've collapsed the picture. I'm no longer non-dual. Non-dual means that it is what it is. There's not life and which is happening to me, those two categories, because as soon as I categorize it, we've given thought the run of the place. We don't want to give thought the run of the place. It'll make a mess of it. In this particular instance, when we're talking about pain, thinking mind no good for pain, no good at all. And so what we do is we don't collapse, and when we don't collapse, there's just what there is, and it's not that life is happening to me, this thing called life, but it is all life. I'm life. The thing is that I'm calling life is life. There's no division. It's just a stupid verbal convention to say life is happening to me. It's a dangerous one because we get trapped into it. So if I don't do this, if I don't create this trap for myself, then there's just what's happening. And no one's making it happen, and it's not happening to anyone. There's no controlling. There's no being controlled by. It's just the thing that's happening. And that absolutely is the bottom line, because that is the experience before we start analyzing the experience. We analyze it, we break it down into parts. If we don't analyze it, then there aren't any parts. There can't be any parts unless we analyze it, because it's only us that puts parts in things. So when we don't analyze, there's this experience that I'm having. Actually, as soon as I say that, I've fallen into the trap myself immediately, because it's not me having an experience, it's just all the experience and there's no one having it. But these verbal conventions are hard to sidestep. So that can be painful. It could equally well be painful, or as it could be pleasant. But if it is painful, we can rest assured that it's nowhere near as painful as soon as I collapse it into, oh my God, I'm having a painful experience, or life is happening to me and this is terrible. This thing that's happening, there's a thing happening to me, and whatever the thing is, and it's terrible. Because then I've created and exacerbated the self as a point of view. And then when I've done that, it's the principle of irreversibility here, because I can't back out, because as soon as I start seeing things this way, because I'm scared, basically, I'm panicked and I'm falling back on thought, falling back on the self, I'm trapped in it because my horizons narrow down so much. So then I have this experience of whatever it is I'm experiencing from the point of view of this kind of nucleus, this kind of this little encapsulated entity of the self, which is a point of view. It's a way of looking at things. We separate the world and the self that's living in the world, or life, and the one who is either living life or life is happening to them. So we've created this dichotomy, which is false and which we get trapped in. And there's an awful lot of suffering to be had from this particular illusion, because once we start looking in this particular way, things can get very, very painful indeed. And there's no escape from this pain, ultimately, because the pain is a function of our separateness, our isolation, the fact that we've separated ourselves from everything. It's like becoming really, really self-conscious. Become really, really self-conscious. It's hard to kind of back out of it again. And that, I suppose, in a social situation, is what I'm talking about, becomes very painful. And there's no method when you're very, very socially awkward or socially uncomfortable to not be, because any method complicates it and makes it less natural, makes the whole thing less natural. So although in positive therapy we might say, okay, here's some things to do, there are no things to do, because it exacerbates the issue. The issue is separateness. When we take that separateness for granted and start acting so as to minimize the pain that's caused by that alienation, that separateness, we're just reifying the misapprehension that lies at the very root of all of that. So we're digging ourselves into a hole, and digging, and the more we do, or the more we try and fix it, the deeper the hole that we're digging. But there is this incredible thing that if I don't do that, then no matter how severe or extreme the situation, it's not experienced from the viewpoint of the beleaguered ego. That's just a way of experiencing it that I can have if I bring it upon myself. But if I don't bring it upon myself, and even then, saying myself implies that there is a self there before I bring it on myself, but there isn't. So the self that I bring it on to is only there after the collapse, after the break in symmetry. And then I'm sitting there, which corresponds to the biblical motif of the fall. That's how we suddenly we've broken symmetry, and we're sitting there scratching our heads, facing into that particular way of looking at life, because we've broken symmetry. I'd made myself separate and alienated from the bigger picture, and within the bigger picture there was no separate me. There doesn't need to be. Why would there be? So then, even though the situation is painful, that pain isn't being experienced by a brittle little ego. It's pain, but there is no me that the pain is happening to. Now this sounds very much like a dodge or a trick here. I could say, here's a neat little trick. Try this. Pretend you're not a me. Just try and look at it. That doesn't work, of course, because to pretend that I'm not a me implies that actually I really am. So straight away, by trying to do this deliberately, turning it into a kind of a strategy, has a reverse effect. There's no strategizing here, because this is how things were before anything else happens, before any strategizing happens, before any particular point of view, before I start analyzing or thinking about it. This is a situation which is what's happening is what's happening, and there's no need to conceive of life as happening in relation to this self, which is the self trying to make itself so important, and it's all happening to me. It's all about me. I'm center stage. I'm hogging the limelight. I'm making myself the supremely important thing, which I don't have to, because obviously I'm not the supremely important thing, because how can I be? Because that involves splitting the world into two, experience and the experiencer, which is purely, as I keep on saying, a convention. So when we do refrain from breaking symmetry, refrain from panicking, it's like there's a stampede, all of a sudden we stampede and we create this dual situation. If we don't do that, and it doesn't matter what happens, because I'm not experiencing it from an unreal viewpoint. The problem with experiencing things from an unreal viewpoint, there's nothing else for us to do but squirm and struggle and look for cleverer and cleverer tricks to get out of the fix that we're in, because the unreal situation, which is a mental image of myself, has no resilience, has no strength, has no flexibility, has no suppleness, has no, it's very, very brittle, because it doesn't have any strength at all. It just has armor to protect anything from happening to it. If anything does get through the armor and happen to it, there's got no strength to deal with it. So for the self-concept, everything comes down to, on the one hand, armor and insulation, on the other hand, clever tricks. That's all it's got. Okay, so maybe it makes the most of it, and maybe it can have some really, really heavy-duty armor, colossal armor, and some fantastically clever tricks. That's where positive therapy comes in. But all that really cannot compare to the situation where we don't need armor and we don't need clever tricks, where I don't need to defend myself against whatever it is, because by defending myself I create myself. So it's like a reflex movement to defend myself, and bang, I've created myself, and then I'm stuck in myself. So if I don't do that, there is another quality in it. We could call that quality what people like to call resilience. It doesn't really work, because resilience, as we think about it, is a property or something belonging to the self. Here's a resilient self. It's plenty of resilience in that self. Look at it. Knock it down. Look at it. It's bouncing up again. Sure, it's fine. That's a resilient old self. And that's bullcrap, because there is no such thing as a resilient self. There is no such thing as a resilient ego. It can fake being resilient, but that's a clever defense, clever trick. I'm not sure if it's a defense or a trick. But there is no such thing as a resilient self, ego. It can't be, because it's an artificial category. It's got nothing in it. It's not real, only who you really are, can have any resources to draw upon. And who we really are isn't the end result of a symmetry break or collapse into subject-object. That's just a game we play. And we play that game by giving away all of our freedom and becoming this kind of victim of circumstances, or we become the one who needs to struggle and control very carefully in order not so that the bad thing doesn't happen. And that's the game in its entirety. It's kind of exciting in a way because we could win or we could lose. But even if we win, we still are this brittle, non-resilient ego. And the best thing would be not to be that brittle, non-resilient, uptight ego, because there's a lot of suffering in that, whether we win or lose. As Wei Wu Wei says, we imagine that pleasure is something different from pain, but it isn't. It's just that the way that the self-concept has it looking at the world or relating to the world. So that the self-concept's making everything about it, and if this works out, there's pleasure, and if it doesn't work out, there's pain. But it's all delusory stuff anyway. The pleasure and the pain is just the unreal ego. That's what it's made up of: unreal pleasure and unreal pain. So the transcendence isn't something we work towards via a method, because methods split everything and fragment everything more and more and more, and they fragment, then the fragments, etc. And that's what thought does. So we're not going towards wholeness, which is health. Like Alan Watts says, wholeness comes from the Old English root hail, or something like hail, maybe a word before hail. That means health. That's where our health comes from, being whole, not being fragmented by thought. But it's not the health of the self-concept, because the self-concept doesn't have any health anymore than it has any resilience. Okay, thanks for watching.